there just seemed to be a narrow thinking everywhere we went. And it was very distressing for me and for Brian and our little boy, who was 9 years old at the time. So we found that whole assignment very stressful. So getting a call in our home to ask Brian if he would accept a transfer to Australia was a joy. We would have taken a rocket out of there that day, I think, if we could have. And as we began to pack up our home and get ready for the move, Brian and I began to read everything we could find out about Australia and its citizens. And one of the things that we read was how many sheep lived here. Now, I find that funny to mention to you now, because the whole 40 years I've been here, I don't think I've seen more than 3 sheep. But at the time, what we were reading was that there were so many thousands of sheep here. And I began to do some more research on that, because I thought I'd be seeing sheep everywhere, which didn't happen. And I remember one conversation Brian and I had when we shared our ignorance, our knowledge about sheep, because we'd only lived in cities. We'd never been on a farm even. So sheep were not something we were familiar with. And I began to extend my research as I thought about the story of Jesus and the lost sheep. What I found in the last couple of months as I cleaned out the office in my home was some notes that I wrote, and these notes are 40 years old, when I was doing my research on sheep. And here's what I want to share with you tonight, and I think it has a powerful message to it. Every once in a while, a ewe will give birth to a lamb and reject it. The farmers have no idea why and how this seems to happen, but it does. And if the lamb is returned to the ewe, the mother may well kick it away. Once a ewe rejects a lamb, she'll never change her mind. So that lamb is banished forever. The farmers reported that those little lambs hang their heads so low that it almost looks like something is wrong with their necks. Their spirit's broken. These little lambs are called bummer lambs. And unless the shepherd intervenes, that lamb will die, rejected and alone. So do you know what the shepherd does? He takes that rejected little lamb into his home. He hand feeds it. He keeps it warm. He places it by the fire. And during the day, he'll wrap it up with blankets and hold it to his chest so that the bummer can hear his heartbeat. Once the lamb is strong enough, the shepherd will place it back in the field with the rest of the flock. But that sheep never forgets how the shepherd cared for him. That sheep may never forget being rejected by its mother, but it never, ever forgets the farmer that gave it life again. When the shepherd is then later on out in the field, calling the lambs in, guess which one of the sheep runs to him first? Yeah, I'm sure you can guess. The bummer. The bummer lamb beats all the others, gets right up to the shepherd right away. The reason for that is that bummer lamb knows the voice of the farmer intimately. He's heard that voice speaking to him in loving tones. Despite the fact that his mother's rejected him, that lamb senses the love that's in the voice of the farmer. It's not that that bummer lamb is now loved any more than any other lamb. It's just that he's known firsthand what that love feels like. And it isn't that he's loved more, it's just that he's experienced love one-on-one, which many other lambs probably never experience. Now, I've already shared with you tonight that just before coming to Australia, my dad took his own life. I finally thought of who I wanted to tell you my dad looks like, Fred Astaire, the dancer. If you took a picture of my dad and put it next to Fred Astaire, you'd think they were twins. The only difference is my dad couldn't dance. My mother was an exhibition ballroom dancer and a singer, but my dad couldn't dance, and he knew the words to two songs. One, the Tennessee Waltz, and the other one, Jerusalem. And at Christmas time, he would sing those two songs for us, but they were the only two he knew. But after my dad took his life, I felt like a bummer lamb. I felt broken. And in many ways, I felt rejected. I told myself that if I had been a better daughter, if I'd been a more loving daughter, that wouldn't have happened. And so I blamed myself. And you know, it's no use people saying to you, don't blame yourself, don't feel bad. That's rubbish. You're going to feel what you feel. And my feelings were so wrapped up in how much love I had for my dad. And even though I recognized that he was introverted, which meant he didn't talk about what was wrong, I still felt a deep connection with him. I felt rejected. And to be honest, when I look back, I rejected me. After all, if I'd have been a better person, maybe this wouldn't have happened in my life. But I also learned in the middle of all of that Jesus really is the Good Shepherd. He does care for our every need, and he holds us close to his heart so that we can hear his heartbeat. And while I recognized my brokenness, I also knew, even in the middle of all of that I was deeply loved by the shepherd. My salvation came in the founding of Camp Quality. And the idea wasn't mine. It's not an original idea. The idea came from a magazine article about a little girl facing her own death. And I can actually show you that magazine article because it's precious to me. This is it. The little girl that you see featured in that picture, her name was Teddy. And at the age of 10, she had a birthday party for 10 friends at her home. And a week later was diagnosed with a brain tumor that was inoperable. And the magazine article was very well written. It talked first to the dad. What does it feel like to be a dad when your child gets that diagnosis? And he talked about feeling that as a father, he should be able to fix everything that happened to his child, and he couldn't fix this one. They then interviewed the mother, and she talked about how difficult it was for her to even contemplate losing this little girl, and how she was struggling to support her son, who was also having quite a difficult time acknowledging that this was going to happen. But then they interviewed her. And it was her interview that was a life changer for me. Here was a little girl of 10 trying to deal with the fact that she was going to die because her family had been very open and talked to her about it. And yet was still full of life, wanting to be with her school friends, wanting more than anything to be with other children instead of being isolated, as many kids with cancer are. And in reading her article and her interview, it touched my heart. And I felt ashamed when I read it, because I thought, here's a child dealing with her own death. And here am I, an adult, and I'm not coping at all with the fact that my dad had died. And I made phone contact with that family who lived in New York. The family name was Mervis. There are things about this that I'll never forget. And I spoke to Gary Mervis, who was Teddy's dad. And I said to him, tell me what you have done for your little girl that has made any difference. And he asked me why I was asking the question. And I said briefly, my dad's taken his own life. I'm struggling. I feel like my life's not worth going on with. And I'm just wondering what you've done for your little girl. And he said, you've called me at the right time. We've just come back from a camp. And I said, what kind of a camp? And he said, we took about 10 children from the cancer ward that Teddy's being treated in. We took them to a campground. We put them in a cabin. Their families came with them, and they stayed in surrounding cabins, and we all stood back and we watched. And I said, and what? What happened? He said, first of all, we heard Teddy laugh for the first time since diagnosis. And the rest of that weekend, we just stood back and we watched children role modeling for other children how to cope with cancer. And we've determined that we're going back to that setting as often as we can. Why don't you, Vera, get on a plane and come with us the next time? And I said, look, I'd love to. I really would. But my family leaves this weekend to go to live in Australia. But when I get there, I will find a program like yours, and I'll be a volunteer, and I'll stay in touch with you. Well, the short end of that story is that I jumped in the deep end, knowing next to nothing about kids with cancer. Let me tell you how my ignorance began to show very quickly. I went to a hospital in Sydney, was called Camperdown at the time, and asked to speak to someone in the children's cancer ward. And the lady said to me, you need oncology. I said, no, it's the children's cancer ward I want. She said, lady, that's what that means. And I thought to myself, okay, Vera, you're on a really steep learning curve here. You don't even know the name of the ward. But that became the thing that I focused on when I couldn't focus on my grief over my dad. And I jumped in the deep end, and I made lots and lots of mistakes, no question. But out of it came Camp Quality. And ironically, once on camp with children with cancer, it was conversations with them that healed my grief for me, one Band-Aid at a time. Now, obviously, there's a lot longer story to Camp Quality than that. But in a nutshell, that's how I began to dive into Camp Quality to save myself. And guess what? It worked. I think that anytime that you're hurting about any issue whatsoever, especially one that's causing you depression, the best thing to do is get involved with somebody who needs your help. If anything will take your mind off your own worries, it usually is because you feel like you're of worth and you're helping someone else. So Asher, if you're working with young people and finding it helps them, bless you. And let me tell you, your volunteer work will bless you. You'll be the one at the end who will be able to say, as I can say now, when someone asks me, who gets the most out of Camp Quality? My answer is always the same. You're looking at her. I'm not kidding myself that I didn't get into this because I had a need. I did. And my need was blessed because of getting involved with the kids that were battling cancer. I can only bear witness that in the forming of Camp Quality, in trying to get it off the ground, which was a 2-year battle, And it's 2 years I don't think I'd want to live through again, because I got every knockback you can imagine. But I can only tell you that when you begin reaching out to someone else, your self-worth begins to build when some people respond to you. And for a long time, a lot of people didn't. They thought it was an idea that wouldn't work. But I can bear witness that for me it worked. My grief, as terrible as it was healed slowly but surely by helping someone else who I considered at least was having it tougher than I'd ever had. When people began to help Camp Quality, I was always so grateful. And I found that I was out of words to use to thank them for what they were doing for me and for the kids. And one day I stumbled across a poem. And anyone that knows me and that's been around Camp Quality could probably recite this poem with you, because I've used it so many times. And it still today touches my heart when I have to say thanks to someone for anything that they've done for Camp Quality. And the poem is pretty simple. And it's what I used when people would hand me checks of money to support our program. And it says simply this: since it has been my lot to find at every turning of the road the helping hand of friends most kind, who've helped me with a heavy load. And though I have no gold to give, and love alone must make amends, my humble prayer is, while I live, God, make me worthy of my friends. God bless you.
Oh, Vera, thank you so much. And I said on the Facebook page today that you've been an inspiration to me over many years. And for those who tune in tonight, we're all sure to be inspired. And I think I speak for everybody in saying thank you for those inspiring words again tonight, and for sharing a part of your life. You know, the pain of it and the joy of it. And it reminded me of that scripture that Jesus said, that when you seek to lose your life, that's when you find it. And there's something true about that, isn't there? In seeking to help others or be a blessing to others, you actually find that joy and purpose in life for yourself too. So thank you for sharing tonight, and I hope we can get you back another time so we can hear some more.